What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Power Rangers Hyperforce episode 19. This episode was a very special episode because it took place in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Boom Studios comic Shattered Grid universe. So what that really means is that it actually took place in Lord Draken's universe, and let's just say this much right now, it expanded that whole story. It introduced the Hyperforce Rangers into the mix, and I'll say this much right now, I actually really thought it was a great episode. If you haven't read the comics, you should be doing it. If you haven't yet, start now, because believe me, these comics are amazing, and if you're a Power Rangers fan, what are you doing? So I will say that much right now. Shattered Grid is going to be so awesome. The first one of the Shattered Grid comics is coming on the 28th of March, so look at your local comic shop for that comic when it comes out, because believe me, you will not want to miss it. This episode overall, again, as I said before, really good. So many things happened that I liked. This is not going to be the only episode, that's what I'm going to say. Not the only episode that will take place in this universe. This is actually one of two. The next episode will also continue the story, but with a new character being introduced. And by new, I mean like a special guest. Not someone that's new though, but someone that I'll get into towards the end. I don't want to give it away now just because some of you may want to not know right away what it is. As far as things go with this episode though, we had a special guest, which was Kyle Higgins. Now those that do not know who Kyle Higgins is, he is the main writer behind the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comics. He's the one that's the original creator of the Shattered Grid story that's being introduced in the near future. So very cool. He did a great job, I will say that much right now. This is his first time into an RPG, and I have to say this much right now, I thought he had a great role. I thought he as a person was fun. Sure, he wasn't necessarily like always active, and that's okay, but I liked what they gave him as far as roles go. And for someone that isn't necessarily like known for being like a Power Ranger or being a villain or being something that like is known for some sort of role, I actually really liked it just because of who he is and his connection to the franchise, and you know, the kind of role he introduced to the story. And I thought that it was really fun, and I just really enjoyed it. Also, we had Zach as the DM, and we also had Malika. Instead of playing the DM, she actually played one of the characters. So she actually joined the Rangers this time. And we'll get into that in this episode. I just want to address those points right now up front for those that are wondering. And yes, I do read the comics, so believe me, I know what I'm talking about here. Like, this is good stuff. You need to read these if you haven't been reading them. Like, what are you doing? Again. So let's get started with the actual episode itself. The episode begins with the Rangers celebrating because in the previous episode, they managed to stop the Armada from being taken over by the Alliance, which initially they were uncertain as to whether or not that's actually true or not. And then eventually it's confirmed that yes, there's no more Armada being taken over by the Alliance, and the Armada is now completely destroyed. So at that point, what we also hear is that Zach does the voice of Alpha 55, and my opinion of Alpha 55 is he was okay. You know, this was actually one of the better voice roles that he's done. I mean, I don't really like Zach when it comes to his voice roles a lot of times. He actually did a pretty good job as a DM this episode. I actually did like him a lot with what he did, and that's kind of saying something big for me because personally, in the past roles that he's had, I've really not liked Zach. So this kind of makes me, you know, a little bit more reassured with my feelings towards him, and, you know, doesn't mean that I'm completely forgiving or against or whatever towards him, but it's just, it's something I noted, you know, in my head, just from my experiences with the show and my feelings towards him from his past roles, specifically when I go back to the Christmas episode, which to me is probably my least favorite episode we've had. You know, this one stood out to me as a much better role for him, and I actually liked him as a DM a lot. Don't get me wrong, I still like Malika a lot better, but Zach was pretty fun. So what we do end up seeing, I keep on talking about all this other stuff because, like, believe me, people were great this episode, and so it's like I have to thank. I want to just say how happy I was. You know, I don't always do that as much as I need to, but you know, this was just a really special episode for me and for everyone that likes Hyperforce and everyone that's excited for the comics. You know, this is just one of those episodes where you have to gush a little, and you know, that's just what I'm doing right now. You know, I'm trying to express my feelings towards this masterpiece of an episode. Yeah, I'm going that far as to call it a masterpiece. Yeah. So let's get into it. I keep on trying to continue here. Anyway, of course, as we know, they're trying to stop the Alliance now from saving Zordon. Instead, they're trying to stop Zordon from being saved and making sure that Andros accomplishes his goal, which was to make Zordon a sacrifice so that they can destroy all the forces of evil that existed in the Zordon era. So forces from Astronema all the way back to Rita. So that's very important, of course. Eventually, what we also know is that there's a disturbance in the time ship and there's a surge of energy. They also bring up the fact that there are other time ships that were taken from Time Force. As you may remember in one of the previous episodes, not too long ago, that there were other Time Force ships stolen. Now, the thing is that an energy surge occurs which leads them to an alternate dimension. Now, the thing is that it's not clear, and it still hasn't been made clear exactly as to who stole that ship. Could it have been, you know, Lord Draken or someone from, you know, the Boom, you know, from Boom Studios, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comics? Maybe. We don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. But it is an interesting thought because they did address it initially in this episode, but they never went anywhere with it. So we'll have to find out either in the next episode or they may forget it. Hopefully that isn't the case, but we can't say anything for sure as of now. So what I will say from here is that the Rangers do arrive in New Tech City, which is important because New Tech City is the is the location for the SPD era, and that's very important. But the thing is that when they arrive there, it looks familiar to them, like it looks like the same kind of place, but at the same time there's still new things, like there's a new mountain range, there's new buildings. It doesn't look the same, yet it has a lot of the same features. So, you know, it has this kind of familiar yet different feel to it that kind of disturbs them and makes them worried as to why this is the way it is. So they also begin to wonder about different things. Marv asks where they're located. They're located in a park, which is important. Nothing seems really destroyed, so it doesn't look like it's some sort of end of the world, like ground zero kind of scene. You know, it's pretty much in standard shape, but at the same time, you know, they can't see everything around them, so they have a limited vantage point as far as seeing if there's anything like terrible or rough going on. And I'm kind of hinting at things for the future, but you get my point. It's not clear from their perspective as to what else could be going on. So what does end up happening is that the Rangers end up leaving the Hyperforce ship. They end up heading out. Chloe uses her stealth to try to sneak around and try to get to different vantage points. Eventually, what does end up happening is that, what do you call it? Eddie ends up, well, actually, Chloe ends up spotting a whole bunch of black Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Yes. Like 3 or 4 black Mighty Morphin Power Rangers initially. And the thing is that she's very curious about them. Eddie decides to head towards the direction of them and is caught. And what happens is that following this, Vesper decides to also run up to kind of help out Eddie and make sure that, you know, he has backup. Thing is that when they arrive there, we notice that the guns they have aren't, you know, Ranger-like weapons. These are military-based weapons, you know, real guns that could really hurt someone. And they have military-like armor, and they're not the traditional kind of Ranger suits that you would see for a black Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. So obviously they're very curious as to what these Rangers could be. And what does end up happening is that we see several different occurrences between, you know, Marv trying to do sneaky attacks, as well as other Rangers trying to do all sorts of different things. We also see that Marv ends up running up and morphing and trying to destroy some of the guards. Chloe enters in and she also morphs. Actually, most of them do end up morphing. Jack does at one point. Vesper definitely does. You know, everyone gets some involvement, and eventually they do take out these black Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So following this, what happens is that a laser blast is heard, and Captain Hicks appears. Now, Captain Hicks is played by Kyle. Kyle Higgins, who's the guest for the episode. So he is Captain Hicks. And the thing is that he actually lets some of the MMPR Rangers get close to him before he tries to do an attack. And he tries to be this kind of sly, cool kind of character, which I actually appreciate with his personality and the fact that he's supposed to be portraying someone from some kind of cool Marine warfare 80s vibe, show character or whatever. And I think that it's a neat kind of character that he goes for. He does end up defeating a bunch of the sentries as well, and Captain Hicks asks about teleportation and tells the Rangers that if they want to survive, they have to come with him. So that's all important. Another individual also appears. That individual is reported to be Major Galouche, I believe. It's a weird name, but the thing is that we end up meeting Major Galouche, who's above Captain Hicks, and then there's Captain Hicks's underling, which is Fidget. Fidget is someone that actually had like a Zord fragment or something, like I forget what the exact term was, but something that like a shrapnel hit him, and he thought that he gained certain kind of powers, but he really didn't gain anything, and he just became like a nut. And by a nut I mean like he's crazy. And then we also have like Private Rice. So those are all interesting names and unique choices. What do you call it? Marv also talks to Vesper about like how she's been acting, because she's been acting like she's like all powerful and can just go out and take hits for days or whatever, and just be this almighty figure and put herself in danger to protect her friends. And it's good that she's protecting her friends, but at the same time, they don't want her to be put in so much danger where she's gonna really get hurt, and they care for her, obviously, the Hyperforce Rangers. At the same time, what is important is that Captain Hicks says that being sentimental can get you killed, and the thing is that the Hyperforce Rangers basically kind of say like, we'll survive. Like they try to kind of talk back to Captain Hicks, saying like, this is how we do things. We are a family, and that's what's important to us. And there's this constant like bickering back and forth about all this. What does end up happening is that they actually head back to where Captain Hicks and the others come from, and we also learn that Captain Hicks's first name is Michael, so it's Michael Hicks, by the way. That's important to note, just because of the name and its significance and what it's related to, if you know what it's trying to imply there. What we do end up learning actually is that Captain Hicks was from Zach Taylor's team, and we also learn about the whole story about Tommy Oliver and how they knew him as the Black Dino Thunder Ranger, but there were several other iterations of him, but in their world it's different. And we end up learning the whole story about like who's alive, who's dead, how did Lord Draken become who he was, and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to give it all away, just because of the fact that for those that have not seen it, I'm sure you'll want to hear about it. But it's a pretty interesting story. If you've read the comics, you know it from that. And believe me, it's a really, really amazing kind of story to read and just think about. Because, I mean, it's so much. And, like, it's a really cool concept for a story that, I can never see this happening in the real show. But, I mean, it's pretty amazing to think about when you really like think about like the ideas behind this and how Lord Draken formed and everything, with the green and the white Ranger powers and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just so cool to think about that whole story and how they kind of came about creating this unique interpretation of these characters and their fates in the future. I mean, just so different. What we also end up learning is about the different sentries as far as strengths and all that. So for example, the Mastodons are considered like basically the weakest of the sentries, so the ones that they fought were the weakest kind, which doesn't mean that they're actually weak. I mean, they still had to struggle when it came to fighting them in that first fight. And the thing is that what's above them is the saber-tooth sentries, and what's above them is the Tyrannosaurus sentries. And the thing is that the Tyrannosaurus sentries are the elite sentries, meaning that they are at the top, and they are not really seen anymore. So that's very important to remember. They are not commonly seen because of current events, and the thing is that at the same time, Lord Draken has been missing for quite some time. So that's important as well. He's been missing for about a month or so, they said, and that is interesting to note. We also learn is that Trini and Zack are disconnected to the morphing grid, so that's also why they don't really have any way of connecting with anyone and knowing that there's any morphing energies in the area. So when it came to the Mastodon sentries, they had no way of telling because those weren't really rangers. Those were sentries, meaning that they were like more likely than not robots or humans that were being controlled or were loyal to whoever was above them. And we also do end up learning that Scorpina is technically the one that's actually leading all these sentries here. The thing is that, as we said before, Lord Draken at this point has been seen as missing or dead or just not really there. And so that's kind of important to note. And Scorpina is kind of leading the charge here. So that is important, and that is something that's kind of brought up a little bit later, but I'm just kind of going back and forth with certain points. We learned about Billy and Tommy's trip to this world and how they helped out with a fight when they came from their world to this world, because there was multiple different experiences, and also about how they managed to destroy Lord Draken with a power coin. We learn all that kind of stuff. The Rangers also make it through, and the thing is that we also learn of the Colonel. The Colonel is the person that actually Malika is playing, so she's interesting. And we also end up learning that these people that they're with are called the Coinless, because they don't have any power coins and all that, and the power coins really don't really exist that much. So that's kind of interesting to note. As they enter into a manhole, Fidget and Private Rice kind of open it up. They enter in and make their way through some sewers. They see that the majority of the people that are there are people in rags, and they make up the majority of the population of the area. And a lot of them, especially the kids, haven't seen daylight ever. Like, they may have seen glimpses of people going up, but they've never seen straight up daylight where they're actually out in the open and all that and living a normal everyday life. What we do also end up finding out who the Colonel is, and we also end up learning that when Scorpina arrived and everything, she took over. Finster 5 was a loyal servant of Lord Draken, so that's important as well. Finster 5, for those that are wondering, is a new robot character made by Lord Draken that was kind of introduced recently through images, and we got some minor details on him through this episode, but yeah, he's pretty loyal. What do you call it? Also, Scorpina has taken a move to the city as a ticking time bomb, so that's important. The Colonel, as I said before, the Colonel is supposed to be Lena Song, which is very cool. So Lena Song, for those that have not watched Power Rangers Hyperforce much, Lena Song is a original character from the SBD episodes of Power Rangers Hyperforce, which was a very important character in those episodes. And we ended up seeing in that story that she became a ranger. But in this universe, she's older and she's a colonel, and she grew up during the times of Lord Zed initially ruling, but then eventually Lord Draken taking over, and that led to her being a colonel, and then eventually, as we know, Scorpina took over. So yes, 3 different rulers. Obviously, there's also Rita, so there was actually 4 rulers that occurred. But the thing is that Scorpina does not really care if people are loyal to her. She just wants to cause destruction. So that's very different from Lord Draken or Lord Zed, where they actually wanted to gain a what do you call it? They wanted loyalty and followers and people that would be descendants of their power when they went. They wanted to have a legacy, which is kind of different from Scorpina, where she just wants to, you know, she doesn't care about that kind of stuff. We also learned about like Lord Draken's name, which came from a general that fought alongside Rita Repulsa, by the way. So if anyone's wondering where that name comes from, yes, it was a general that fought alongside Rita Repulsa back when she was conquering different worlds before the space dumpster incident that led to the first episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and everything. So that's kind of interesting to note. What we also end up learning is that they have a plan. They're trying to take out they're trying to figure out some information about Scorpina, and they're also trying to rescue some of the coinless soldiers that they have, 30 to be exact, that are prisoner. So they learn all this information. What does end up happening is that what do you call it? Sorry about that. That was a car. What we do end up learning about is that they have different plans to deal with to kind of get the soldiers. They need to find out also new information, and the thing is that they learn about Vesper eventually being an android, which is the really important point for them, because that basically, you know, creates a certain perspective as to what uses do we have for these Rangers. You know, the fact that the Rangers is great because none of these people are Rangers. They're all just regular people that have weapons. The fact that there are Rangers, that's actually very useful. But the thing is, they learn that like Chloe has her great stealth, and Vesper's an android, and she has great knowledge of technology and how to hack things. So like they really want to take advantage of those different points. What we do end up seeing eventually is that the what do you call it? The Hyperforce Rangers come up with a plan with Fidget. There's even a joke at one point that's thrown in regarding Fidget. His name, you know, Fidget Spinner, where like Vesper spins him, and then she refers to him as a fidget spinner, which, you know, is cute and kind of silly, and I get it, but it was, you know, it worked. I'm trying to think, what can I say? Their plan, for those that are wondering, is basically to have some of the, like the privates and some of the like the major and some other troops come from underground, while Chloe and Vesper have their own mission, which is like Vesper will go with Song and Captain Hicks to kind of enter into the location to kind of find out new information about what Scorpina is planning, and Eddie's going to join as well and kind of act as like a guard, and at the same time we'll have Marv and Chloe and Jack kind of defending everyone and starting a distraction or explosion of some sort. So all this is very important and key to the story. They eventually do end up committing to this plan where they end up heading towards where they're supposed to go to. They have to deal with different fences that are in their way that are all barbed wire. They end up having to fight huge amounts of sentries that are constantly appearing. They have to destroy towers, and all sorts of different occurrences do end up happening. We have moments with the Rangers fighting in different setups. You know, I'm trying to not give everything away, and at the same time I don't want to go over every single move. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of different fights that occur. Eventually Marv even summons his Zord. What do you call it? Vesper and Detective Song, not Detective Song, Colonel Song in this case. Colonel Song head into the what do you call it? The prison. There's distress everywhere. Things are not looking good. Eddie and Captain Hicks fight some of the sentries in the area, and eventually they end up finding out the information that they need to find out on the on Scorpina's plans. At the same time, we also have it where you know, the other Rangers that are there are trying to deal with different sentries. I believe Chloe even tries to use her dynamite from the previous episode to destroy a tower and lead to an explosion that allows for the troops that are below to have a diversion that will allow them to get in and help out as best they can with fighting sentries and just in general being involved in any way possible. So that's very important and interesting to note. As I said before, Marv does use his Zord, and he helps out in different situations. Eventually, inside the prison where Vesper finds out the information, we learn that Scorpina is planning on using Serpentera to actually destroy the entire West Coast, which is very interesting. I like the fact that they're going for Serpentera just because Serpentera is a pretty cool Zord. You know, obviously an evil Zord, but is something very special, and I actually like the fact that they went with Serpentera. What we do end up learning as well is that eventually Captain Hicks begins to reveal that he has another purpose and he isn't who he says he is. That's very important. And the thing is that what does end up happening is that what do you call it? Colonel Song tries to make Vesper contact Zach Taylor so that he's made aware of the information that they dug up, since he wants to know that stuff. So when they tell Zach Taylor what's going on, Zach as in like Zach the Black Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, the real Zach, what happens is that they mention that they're there with Captain Hicks, and the thing is that Zach Taylor said Captain Hicks went missing over a month ago. Whoever you had with you isn't Captain Hicks. And that leads to suddenly Captain Hicks transforming, and he becomes the Pumpkin Rapper, which is very, very, very cool. I love the fact that they went for the Pumpkin Rapper. Very cool character. We had some great rapping between Eddie and Kyle. Eddie and Pumpkin Rapper, which was really just a lot of fun. You know, Pumpkin Rapper had stuff that was already scripted, but as far as Eddie goes, like, he just kind of retorted on the spot, which was fine. And you know, if you know Andre, you know that he could totally do that, so that's cool, and I love the fact that they went for that. Eventually the Rangers do end up fighting the Pumpkin Rapper. There's several different attacks that are thrown at him. The Rangers manage to do pretty well against him until eventually he decides to grow big, of course. And the thing is that Finster 5 has kind of pretty dangerous, you know, a pretty dangerous setup where if you're at a certain weakened point, you can be made to grow, but at the same time you also risk the chance of actually being completely destroyed rather than suddenly growing at all. Like, you could just completely explode or something. So what does end up happening is that like Pumpkin Rapper actually has to roll die and hopefully win, and that's kind of an interesting thing because eventually he does end up growing big. The Rangers do summon their Zords. What is interesting is that the Rangers don't actually use the Hyperforce Megazord. Of course, that's something that we will see most likely in the next episode, but it is interesting to note that didn't happen this episode. What we do end up seeing, though, is that the Rangers try to rescue several civilians that were kept prisoner. They do end up rescuing, by the way, the coinless soldiers that they were sent there to actually rescue to begin with. So that's also very important to know. And they rescue most of them. What does end up happening eventually, though, is that after several different fights and punches and kicks and everything from the different Zords and all sorts of different special attacks, what does end up happening is that Pumpkin Rapper goes out with one last bang. And I mean that literally, because what he decides to do is self-destruct. And this self-destructing leads to a pretty big devastation at the end, which leads to the remaining civilians, which there's about 15 of them. And 15, you know, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's still something. those 15 get destroyed. Also, all the sentries, so I'm talking about saber-tooth tiger sentries and also the mastodon sentries that are in the area, which there were quite a few, get destroyed, like completely obliterated, which is pretty important. We also see that Jack gets really badly injured to the point that he's like at 16 health, potentially meaning that he could die. We're not sure, of course, and I really hope that that isn't the case, because Jack is like either my favorite character or one of my favorite characters overall. So, you know, you never want to have that happen to your favorite character. You know what I mean? I mean, we'll have to wait and see what does end up happening. Of course, they could bring him back with their health power-up that they used in the previous episodes in the past, so that's kind of important to note. They'll probably do something like that, but in his current state, he clearly is not in the best shape. We will have to see what does end up happening. Their Zords do get damaged, but not completely destroyed, so that is also important. Overall, from here, it's interesting because what we end up seeing is that the Tyranno Rangers and also Tyranno Ranger sentries, the Red Ranger sentries end up coming down to Earth, as well as a figure that says, cease all this, stop, enough. You know, like he basically tries to tell them to stop all this, and at that point, what we end up seeing is Lord Draken. So that's basically where the episode ends, and what we know is that the next episode will lead to the Rangers having to fight Lord Draken. And what's very exciting is that Lord Draken will be played by Jason David Frank in the next episode. So he will be the guest star next week. If you are interested in seeing that, and I will say this much right now, you should be. Look forward to it, because he will be a very cool character to see as a villain. Of course, we know him as the evil Green Ranger, so we have seen him in the past in an evil role before, but it is cool to see him as Lord Draken. I think that's really great. If you haven't seen the promo for Shattered Grid, you should watch it, because that actually has Jason David Frank, the actor who played Tommy, actually doing a kind of promo for the comics, and it's pretty awesome. He does a great job at that, and I can't wait to see how he does with this role next week. Just really, really cool stuff overall. Again, they've been saying recently that they're going for a lot more special announcements, whether that be guest or other things that are exciting. So, you know, last episode they announced this and several other things like WonderCon and all that kind of stuff. This time they announced Jason David Frank. Who knows what will be episode 21, you know? It could be another guest entirely different. Could be that they go back to Time Force. Could be something entirely unheard of, you know? It's very hard to say right now. Of course, as we know as of now, that these next two episodes, 19 and 20, taking place in the Shattered Grid universe, but then the next 5 episodes, which are the last 5 episodes currently planned, doesn't mean that they're 5 episodes that will end the show entirely, because for all we know, they could have a second season. You know, will be very interesting to see what happens with those, because again, last 5 episodes of this current season. If it turns out that this is the end, it's the end, but it should be very interesting to see where things will go from here. I know this video was definitely longer than usual. I know that I've had some that are about 30 minutes. This one stood out a little bit longer just because I had a lot more to say. And I will say this much, again, I thought that a lot of people did a great job. You know, Kyle Higgins as a guest, really fun. It would be great if he showed up next week. I'm not necessarily holding my breath to that, but if it turns out he is, great. If he isn't, that's fine. Jason David Frank, I can't wait to see it again. I know that he was Dr. O in one of the previous episodes, but I do want to see him in this role. Yes, I know, more Tommy. Some people are happy. Some people will be like, ugh, too much of him. You know, to me, I'm never going to complain either way. I think that he has some great things that he does, and at the same time, I do understand the complaints that he gets a little too much attention. Believe me, like, I understand it completely. I wish that, you know, there was a little bit more use of other Rangers, but at the same time, I think that he does do a good job in a lot of ways, and I'm not gonna go out of my way to say like, ugh, I'm upset. Like, I'm not upset. I think that it's fitting with the story, and it makes a lot of sense just because, like, who else would they have gotten for this kind of role? And I just can't wait to see what they're gonna do with it overall. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'd love to know your opinions. I know this video was long again, as I said before. I will see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I am Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.